When I sledgehammered 3 dirt bikes and dumped the pieces on my HOA president's lawn, I wasn't trying to start a war. I was ending one. But, of course, this is Karen we're talking about. And Karen doesn't lose quietly. And no, this isn't a movie. This is what happens when a Karen-backed fake HOA plays militia in the wrong neighborhood. Freeze frame, yep. That's me. The guy whose private well HOA Karen tapped into to illegally water her garden. What did I do? I flushed her system with sewage. And oh buddy, that was just the beginning. It all started 2 months before the great dirt bike decimation, when I made the mistake of moving into a neighborhood that looked normal, quiet lawns, wide streets, trimmed hedges, but was, in fact, governed by a woman who thought she was suburban royalty. I should have known when the welcome committee was just Karen. One person, holding a clipboard, wearing a smile that had the same warmth as a tax audit. She handed me a laminated pamphlet labeled, HOA Guidelines, Read or Be Fined, and told me she was the acting president of the HOA. Funny thing is, my property technically sat just outside the official HOA boundary. She called it an oversight and said they'd amend the charter soon. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. She didn't. She gave me a look like I had spat on her begonias. The first week was tolerable. I ignored the email she sent about my non-regulation mailbox color, and assumed she was just one of those people who doesn't get enough drama in her life unless she manufactures it. The second week, I got a formal notice for trash bin placement. Apparently, mine had been visible from the road for 17 minutes past pickup time. 17 minutes. I clocked it. Then came the engine noises. Every other night, like clockwork, loud revving echoed through the neighborhood around 10 p.m. It sounded like someone was drag racing on a lawnmower. A day later, the entire HOA thread exploded. Karen accused certain residents of illegal joyriding and violating quiet hour codes. I replied in the group email, helpfully noting, I would love to ride a dirt bike, but my imaginary one is still in the shop. No response. Just passive-aggressive silence and a new flyer left in my mailbox about respecting community harmony. So when I came home one weekend and noticed my garage door was ever so slightly ajar, I got that gut feeling. You know the one, like when you know someone's been in your room, but everything's just barely in place. I walked in, flipped on the light, and froze. There were 3 dirt bikes in my garage. Full-sized, mud-splattered, and shoved behind a canvas tarp like they were hoping I wouldn't notice. I don't own dirt bikes. Never have. Never wanted to. And yet there they were. Like some kind of offering from the passive-aggressive HOA god. I checked the door. Locked. No signs of forced entry. Nothing missing. Nothing broken. Just 3 illegal dirt bikes mysteriously parked in my locked garage. I did what any sane person would do. I called the cops. They came. Took a look. Shrugged. If they're not reported stolen, one officer said, and there's no footage of someone placing them here, it's technically a civil issue. Right. Because random dirt bikes just teleport themselves into private garages. Maybe I had a haunted garage. Maybe they were multiplying. But then I spotted it. A sticker peeling off the side of one of the bikes. A school parking permit. I zoomed in, took a photo, ran it through the local high school's online directory. And boom, Karen's son. Senior. Track team. Instagram full of engine selfies and Snapchats captioned, Night Rips. So, I left a note on her door. Short, polite, legally bland. Hi Karen. I think your son may have accidentally stored something in my garage. Please have him remove it ASAP. The next day, I got a violation notice. This one claiming I was illegally housing recreational vehicles on HOA-adjacent property, and that I would be fined if I didn't remove them within 48 hours. You read that right. She puts her kids' dirt bikes in my garage. Then writes me up for having them. I went to confront her. She was standing outside watering her rose bushes. With a hose. Connected to a spigot that, wait for it, was on my side of the property line. I asked. Is that your water line? She said, Oh, don't worry, the HOA approved a shared irrigation system. It's all in the amended charter. I don't think I've ever laughed while actively seeing red before. I had a private well, one I'd paid to have installed because the city hookups were spotty in our section of town. That meant Karen had dug a trench and illegally tapped into my well line. And not only that, she'd been using my water for her award-winning tomatoes and her herb garden. Oh, and she gave me a citation for the noise pollution my irrigation system made when it switched on at night. At that point, something snapped. I stopped trying to handle things the adult way. That only works when the other person isn't playing Monopoly with a flamethrower. First, I made a call to my plumber friend. We rerouted the pipe Karen had tapped, legally mine, to a small side tank we filled with greywater. Non-lethal, but nasty. I flipped the valve and waited. The next day, she was outside screaming about the smell. Her precious basil smelled like a backed-up truck stop restroom. I shrugged and said, Maybe your charter needs a plumber. She threatened to sue. I invited her to try. Told her I'd love to bring the whole situation to a judge, including the unauthorized water tap, the phantom violations, and the fact that I now had photos of her kids' dirt bikes in my garage. That's when she played her wildest card yet. The next night, my new camera caught footage of someone creeping into my backyard. Hoodie, skinny frame, slipped through the fence gate like he'd done it before. He typed a code into my garage keypad. The door opened. It was Karen's son, coming back to retrieve his bike. And that's when I realized something even worse. The only way he could have known the code was if someone gave it to him. I checked my garage opener system. Default model. Older. Could be programmed with a universal remote. Karen had access. Probably still did. And she just sent her kid back in under the cover of darkness to clean up her mess before I could act. I stood there, watching the footage, feeling something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just some HOA overreach. This was a war. And if Karen wanted to make my property her personal annexation project, I was about to make her regret ever stepping on my lawn. But first, I had some bikes to deal with. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grainy security footage on loop. Karen's son, hoodie up, slipping through the side gate like it was his after-school hangout. Typing in a code, my code, and unlocking my garage like he owned it. The thing that hit hardest wasn't even the break-in. It was the sheer arrogance. The way he walked in like it was routine. Like this wasn't the first time he'd done it. And if that was true, then Karen had been involved a lot earlier than I thought. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment bad decision from a reckless teenager. This was an operation, authorized and executed by a suburban dictator with a clipboard and a god complex. The next morning, I printed stills from the footage, labeled the timestamps, and made a nice little dossier. I also left another copy of the footage, along with a letter, in a sealed envelope addressed to Karen. Thought you might enjoy this highlight reel. I taped it to her front door with a roll of zebra-striped duct tape. Petty? Yes. Satisfying? Beyond words. Later that day, I attended the monthly HOA meeting. I'd never been before, but I figured now was a good time to show some neighborly spirit. The meeting was held in Karen's oversized living room, of course. The irony of discussing shared community values under the roof of the woman illegally draining my well and trespassing on my property wasn't lost on me. She opened the meeting with her usual dead-eyed smile and welcomed everyone to another evening of community collaboration. I raised my hand before she could finish her first bullet point. She ignored it. I kept it up. Eventually, everyone was staring. Karen, I said, voice calm, before we talk about whether Todd's mailbox flag violates aesthetic unity, I'd like to address something a little more serious, like criminal trespassing. The silence was instant. Karen's face went pale for a second, then flushed red. If you're referring to your recent accusations, I'd appreciate if you didn't bring up personal disputes in a formal setting. Happy to keep it formal, I said, pulling out a USB drive and sliding it across her coffee table. Here's the footage of your son breaking into my garage. I've also brought screenshots, for those who don't like computers. She didn't even look at the drive. She just crossed her arms and said, "You're not part of this HOA. You have no speaking privileges at this meeting." I smiled. Then why do I keep getting violation notices? The room murmured. A few people shifted in their seat. Karen realized she'd miscalculated. Again. I dropped the next hammer. By the way, I had a certified building inspector check the property lines. My house is 12 inches outside the HOA boundary. That means your citations are legally meaningless. And your little water line? That's going to be a bigger issue than you think. Karen's husband, a man who hadn't spoken a single word the entire time, quietly stood up and walked into the kitchen. Smart man. He'd seen enough suburban war zones to know when a napalm drop was coming. Karen tried to regain control. We're actually reviewing new annexation plans to bring surrounding properties into the HOA structure. We're working on a vote. That's when I lost it, internally. Outwardly, I stayed ice cold. You're trying to annex my house into your HOA against my will? Good luck. That would require city approval, zoning board approval, and a unanimous vote from your members. And I'm pretty sure 2 of them are sick of getting noise citations because of your kids' 10 p.m. revving sessions. I looked at Steve and Dana, the couple next door, who had visibly aged 5 years since Karen's son got his license. Steve nodded. Dana said, "Honestly, I thought it was raccoons on ATVs." Karen ended the meeting early. No surprise there. But the fallout was only beginning. The next day, I got hit with 3 violations in a row. Trash bins out past curfew. Lawn height exceeding neighborhood grooming standards. Unauthorized fencing accessories, which I assume meant the wind chime shaped like a goat I'd put up to annoy her. I knew it wasn't going to stop. Karen was the kind of person who didn't back down when cornered. She doubled down, then tried to gaslight you into thinking the corner didn't exist. So I switched tactics. I contacted a zoning attorney. Explained everything. The footage. The unauthorized water line. The false citations. He was so amused he took my case at half rate, just to see how far the HOA insanity went. His advice? Build a case. Document everything. Make it legal. Then hit hard. I also decided to pay for some professional upgrades. I had motion sensor cameras installed on every corner of my property. Not cheap, but worth every penny. I replaced the garage door opener with a newer, encrypted model that couldn't be hacked with a universal remote. I even installed a hidden camera inside the garage itself, pointed directly at the bikes, in case Karen's son tried another late-night visit. But here's the thing about people like Karen. They only get more desperate when the walls start closing in. A week after the HOA meeting, I got an official-looking envelope shoved under my door. Inside was a cease and desist letter claiming I was harassing the HOA and engaging in retaliatory conduct. It was full of typos. Half of it read like it had been written by someone Googling legal letter example while on Ambien. I laughed so hard I nearly passed out. But I kept it, of course. More fuel for the fire. Then came the kicker. That Friday, I was out front raking leaves when a landscaping truck pulled up in front of Karen's house. Out jumped 2 guys carrying something large and familiar. Dirt bikes, covered in tarps. I watched as they rolled them around the side of her house. Then, 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Motion alert. I opened the app and saw it. Karen's son, creeping around the back again, now trying to drag one of the bikes into my garage through the side door. Except this time, he triggered the internal sensor. My phone pinged. My sprinkler system activated. He slipped, fell, and slammed his head into a rake I had leaning against the wall. No blood. Just pride damage. But it was enough. I watched him scramble, soaking wet, dragging the bike away while muttering to himself. He didn't even realize I had footage. Again. I sent Karen one final message. Short. Sweet. Just a screenshot of the video with the caption, "Try it again. I dare you." That's when I decided I was done playing defense. If the bikes were going to keep showing up in my garage, then maybe it was time I did something about them. Something loud. And permanent. There's a moment right before you do something drastic where time slows down. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. More like your brain quietly pauses to ask, "Are we really doing this?" And when you answer, "Yes, yes we are," everything speeds up again. Faster, louder, sharper. That was me, standing in my garage with a sledgehammer resting against my shoulder, staring at the 3 dirt bikes that had become permanent squatters in my life. They'd shown up again the night before, like roaches that refused to die, and this time, I didn't even bother calling anyone. I just smiled, closed the garage, and started planning the demolition. To be clear, I wasn't about to destroy someone's property out of blind rage. This was a calculated, documented, legally sound act of suburban justice. I had spent the last few days consulting with my lawyer, who explained that if someone repeatedly stores unauthorized property on private land, especially after formal notice, the owner has the right to remove or dispose of it. Just don't sell it, he warned. And document everything. So I did. Every angle, every tire tread, every chip decal that proved this was Karen's son's property and not mine. I had timestamps, certified letters, even a notarized copy of the notice I taped to Karen's door saying, "You have 48 hours to retrieve the dirt bike. After that, they will be removed at your expense." She didn't respond. Not a knock. Not a text. Not even a fake legal threat this time. I suppose she thought I was bluffing. Or maybe she figured I'd cave under the pressure of another dozen made-up HOA violations. But what Karen didn't understand was that by pushing this far, she'd triggered something in me I didn't know existed, the part of my soul powered entirely by petty vengeance and cold logic. And that part had a sledgehammer and a GoPro. I set up the camera on a tripod and hit record. I gave a brief statement, introducing myself and the situation for the record. Then I walked over to the first dirt bike, gripped the hammer with both hands, and brought it down like the opening act of a demolition symphony. The sound it made was deeply satisfying, a crunch of plastic, a screech of metal, and a satisfying clang as the front wheel snapped sideways. I didn't stop to admire the damage. I just kept swinging. Over and over. One bike down. Then the second. Then the third. By the time I was finished, the garage looked like a graveyard for motocross dreams. I swept the pieces into piles, sorted the larger chunks into labeled bins. Again, documentation, and loaded everything into a wheelbarrow. The whole process took 3 hours and a thermos of black coffee. And when it was done, I stood back, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and took a deep breath. I wasn't angry anymore. I was serene, peaceful, even, like a monk who just achieved enlightenment by turning a teenage ego machine into modern art. Then came the grand finale. I wheeled the mangled remains of all 3 bikes across the street and dumped them directly on Karen's pristine white driveway. Not in a messy heap, mind you. I arranged them. Carefully. Artistically. One handlebar sticking up like a flag. A bent exhaust pipe twisted into a crude heart shape. I even added a note on top made of refrigerator magnets that spelled out, "Reclaimed property. You're welcome." I walked back across the street, sat on my porch with a glass of lemonade, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. About 20 minutes later, Karen's door flew open so fast it bounced off the brick wall behind it. She stepped out, took one look at the mechanical massacre on her driveway, and screamed like she'd just found a body. Her voice cracked halfway through. Then came the yelling. At first, just general screeching. Then my name. Then threats. She shouted about lawyers, police, city inspectors, even the mayor. I just sipped my lemonade and waved. Eventually, she stomped across the street, furious and red-faced, holding one of the bike seats like it was a severed limb. She marched up to my porch and yelled, "You're going to pay for this," I said, Technically, I already did. I paid with my garage, my well water, my peace of mind, and about 5 months of sanity. Now we're even. She threw the bike seat at my feet. It bounced off the bottom step and landed in the grass like a deflated balloon. I didn't flinch. I just smiled. That unnerved her more than anything. When the police showed up an hour later, called by Karen, of course, they were less enthusiastic about her version of events. I handed them the dossier, the photos, the footage, the certified mail receipt, the 48-hour notice, the signed property lines, the sprinkler footage, even the original HOA map showing that my house was outside their jurisdiction. The officer flipped through it all with an impressed grunt and said, "Honestly, this is the most thorough documentation I've ever seen for a neighborhood dispute." Karen stood there, sputtering, trying to convince the officer that I was unhinged and a danger to the community. But the officer just said, "Ma'am, it looks like this was handled exactly by the book. If you want to pursue a civil case, that's your right. But from where I stand, your son trespassed. Multiple times. You might want to think carefully before escalating this." She didn't like that. Not one bit. But she couldn't argue with it either. Not with a literal stack of evidence thicker than her HOA binder. She stormed off, red-faced and muttering, while the officer gave me a nod and walked back to his cruiser. The next day, I filed a harassment report with the city. I attached the footage, the timestamps, and the threat-filled messages she'd sent me after the incident. A week later, I got an official letter stating that Karen was under a temporary no-contact order regarding any communication or HOA enforcement toward me or my property. For 6 months, she legally couldn't send me a single violation notice, knock on my door, or mention my name in an HOA meeting. But the damage was done. Not to me. To her. The HOA members had started talking. Word got around. People who had been quietly tolerating her reign of passive-aggressive terror were now seeing her in a new light. The woman who tried to annex a property, illegally tapped into a neighbor's well, and framed someone else for her son's dirt bikes wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a liability. And I hadn't even played my final card. Because what Karen didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd submitted a formal complaint to the State Housing Board. Complete with video evidence, financial discrepancies in HOA records I'd dug up, and a list of bylaws that had been applied inconsistently or illegally. An investigation had been opened. Karen thought the bikes were the war. She had no idea the real battle was still on the way. The State Housing Authority doesn't move quickly. It's a slow, bureaucratic machine powered by paperwork, coffee-stained forms, and people who say things like pending review with a straight face. But when it does move, it hits like a wrecking ball wrapped in legalese. About 4 weeks after I submitted my complaint, I got the email. The audit was official. They were investigating the HOA for financial mismanagement, boundary violations, and failure to comply with state HOA governance laws. And best of all, Karen had no idea it was me who initiated it. Yet, in the meantime, she'd gone quiet. Not because she was sorry. Karen doesn't do remorse. She does plotting. But the no-contact order had her boxed in. No emails, no citations, no fake lawyer letters. It must have been killing her. She'd still glare at me across the street like I was personally responsible for global warming, but her hands were tied. The rest of the neighborhood had started to notice too. The once invincible Karen had been defanged, declawed, and publicly humiliated. People were whispering. Some were openly laughing. Steve next door even offered to chip in if I ever wanted to publish the footage as a documentary. I was tempted. The real nail in her coffin came at the next HOA meeting, which I attended purely for entertainment purposes. Karen, red-eyed and clearly stressed, tried to carry on like nothing had happened. She opened with some nonsense about a spring beautification initiative and started talking about community flower bed. No one was listening. Not after the treasurer stood up and quietly said, Karen, where's the invoice for the $5,000 listed under miscellaneous supplies last quarter? She froze, blinked, tried to brush it off with, that was for emergency signage and event planning. He held up a printout. There's no event on record. And no signage either. Someone else chimed in. Didn't you use that to buy those giant HOA branded flags you hung on your porch? Karen mumbled something and tried to move on, but the room wasn't with her anymore. The spell had broken. Her authority, once unshakable, had crumbled under the weight of receipts and red flags. People started asking real questions. How the HOA funds were being used. Why only certain homes kept getting cited. Why her son's dirt bikes had never been reported or acknowledged. It was like watching the end of a very long, very annoying sitcom character arc, except this time, the laugh track was real people rolling their eyes. Then came the email, 2 days later, from the State Housing Authority. A formal notice had been sent to the HOA board informing them of the ongoing investigation. Karen was being asked to step down pending the audit result. Not recommended, as in, comply or face legal action. She stepped down that same week. Technically, she voluntarily withdrew to focus on personal matters. Everyone knew what that meant. It meant she'd finally been out-Karened. And by someone who didn't even go to the meetings until she picked a fight with the wrong house. Then something unexpected happened. A few neighbors came to my door, clipboards in hand. They wanted me to run for HOA president. At first, I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my tea. Me? The guy who turned 3 dirt bikes into abstract art and dropped the pieces on someone's driveway like a deranged Santa? But they were serious. Apparently, my war with Karen had turned me into some kind of local legend. Not just for the revenge, but for standing up to the insanity and keeping detailed receipts while doing it. They said I was the first person to actually push back and win. So I ran. Mostly as a joke. I even put Garage Gremlin as my nickname on the ballot. But a week later, I was elected HOA president by a landslide. No one even came close. Karen didn't show up to the vote. I imagine she was inside her house angrily alphabetizing her legal threats folder or interrogating her son about the garage code situation. Now, most people would have taken the role and done absolutely nothing with it. But I wasn't most people. I saw it as an opportunity to rebuild the HOA into something that didn't make people want to burn their lawn ornaments in protest. My first order of business was to rewrite the bylaws. All of them. From scratch. We eliminated anonymous complaints. If you had a problem with a neighbor, you had to document it and attach your name. No more midnight citations for having the wrong shade of mulch. We added a clause that said no inspections could occur without the homeowner's consent and at least 24 hours notice. I even passed something called the dirt bike clause, which made it explicitly illegal to store someone else's property on a neighbor's land without written consent. The best part? We did it all with transparency. Monthly financial report, open forums, free coffee at meetings. Suddenly, people were actually showing up and contributing. We had fewer violations, fewer complaints, and significantly more laughter. The neighborhood started feeling like a neighborhood again, not a petty dictatorship. But I still had one last loose end to tie up. About a month into my presidency, I filed a permit for a new set of floodlight. Motion activated, environmentally friendly, positioned legally within my property line, and pointed directly at Karen's house. The second she stepped outside at night, she got lit up like a Broadway stage. Not blinding, just bright enough to make standing outside for too long deeply uncomfortable. She complained to the city. They inspected, found everything in compliance. She appealed, lost. Within 3 months, she had a for sale sign in her yard. The neighborhood held a barbecue the day after the moving truck left. Unofficial, of course, but people were smiling in a way they hadn't in years. Kids played without being yelled at for sidewalk chalk. Lawn decorations returned. The goat-shaped wind chime? Still up. still clanging away like a tiny metallic middle finger. As for me, I finally got the piece I'd been looking for when I moved in. No surprise inspections. No made-up rules. No trespassing. Just a quiet house, a garage that belonged solely to me, and a neighborhood that actually enjoyed itself again. But sometimes, late at night, I still watch the footage. Just for fun. The moment Karen's son triggers the sprinkler. The exact second Karen sees the crushed bikes on her driveway. The look on her face during the HOA meeting when the treasurer brings up the missing $5,000. It's better than television. Because it's real. And because every frame of it is proof that when someone like Karen pushes too far, eventually, someone's going to push back. And if that someone happens to own a sledgehammer and a security system, well, that's just poetic justice.